Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of our listeners out there in podcast land. This is Joe coming to you from the She Compass Show with my co-captain Helen. Thank you once again for joining us. And we want to talk a little bit today about the art of complaining. Now, I know that might seem like a strange introduction to offer, but there really is a right way to complain and a wrong way to complain, according to research. I want to start off by reading a little bit of information for you from Psychology Today, which talks about the benefits and the non-benefits of complaining and whether or not it can have an impact on our health. Take a moment to consider how many things you complain about in a given day. The weather, public transportation and traffic, your spouse, your kids, your friends, your boss, the movie you just saw and hated, the meal that arrived cold in the restaurant, the sandwich shop that got your order wrong, the elevator that took too long, the reality TV show that booted off your favorite contestant, and the list goes on and on. When we have so many dissatisfactions and frustrations, yet believe we're powerless to do much about them or to get the results we want, we are left feeling helpless, hopeless, victimized, and bad about ourselves. Obviously, one such incident won't harm our mental health, but we have so many complaints, this scenario happens many times a day. This accumulation of frustration and helplessness can add up over time and impact our mood, our self-esteem, and even our general mental health. So we've all experienced a situation like what we just read about in Psychology Today. We all have a number of different things that bother us, and we want to talk about them and share our feelings about them with people, particularly with people who are close to us at any given time. I don't think a lot of us take as much time as we should thinking about the impact that it can have. Do you ever notice when you are complaining about something, if you talk about it too long, your mood starts to change, you don't feel as well, particularly if you're talking to somebody else who might come into a room in a particular mood, we may not know what mood they're in, and they start talking about something negative, and you start to feel your own sense of contentment, if you will, change. So I think I think what the point of this article is saying, and we'll get to some of the solutions for how to complain the right way a little later. But I think the point of it is to say that it's a good idea to have kind of a happy medium. You don't want to lock all of your feelings away and never talk about them. At the same time, you don't want to spend so much energy talking about negativity that it begins to impact you. Helen, as you may or may not know, for those of you who may be new listeners, has written a book called Finding Our She Compass and talks a lot about how the way we interact with the world impacts our mental health. And as a person that has dealt with women in all facets of illness and change for the last 40 years as a current and former hair replacement specialist, one thing she's really good at is being able to gauge where people are in their life. And she's also, what I think is really amazing, has been able to gauge where people should be in their life. So she can tell if the part of the negativity and the negative space that they're in, how much of it they can control. And so I want to ask you, Helen, just if you maybe want to share a story with us or give us some feedback about people an example maybe that you've been in where you've sort of encouraged somebody to kind of look at their space, find out how much of the negativity that they're experiencing is something that they can change, that they have the power to change.
Well, I look at it like this. There's so many things in our life that we do not have the power of getting out of our situation, in our jobs, in our everyday life, in our marriages, with our children, with food that may come cold, like they said, or with a cell phone attached to you everywhere you go. You have to do a balancing act on yourself to survive and stay sane, because there's just so much going on in life today where people have so many difficulties. I was just actually talking to a young lady about this the other day, and we were talking about entrepreneurship. You can't just focus on one thing at a time. You have to be very, very good at multitasking. And if you're not, you're going to complain so much that you're not going to be able to tolerate your own self, because everything will turn into a complaint, from the way someone interacts with you, to the way your food is cooked, to the way that you interact with others. So the most important thing that I try to tell people is to be able to tolerate inconsistencies that come into your life and people who come into your life. And as we know, toxic people, not everything is really not a legitimate complaint. There are very legitimate complaints, but you have to gauge how much of it you want to give and how much of it you want to take and how much of it you want to manage. I think it's a compartmentalized thing where you have to put everything in a different compartment. And another very important thing I would urge everyone to learn how to do is meditate. And I'm not talking about just meditating in terms of quieting your whole mind and going into a meditative state, because none of us really have the time to do that unless we have a free hour or hour and a half. And I think big companies like Google and things are experimenting with things like people taking naps and getting quiet time, because there's just so much you can do, but there's so many complaints in a day. So what I try to do is when I feel myself getting to the point where a legitimate complaint turns into something where I feel like I'm overwhelmed and I'm just about to break because there's so many things coming at me at one time, I just take a deep breath and I breathe in and I say to myself, it's going to be okay. Just take a deep breath and remind yourself that all of these things can be managed in increments.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Love the She Compass Show? Then help us become a winner at the 14th Annual People's Choice Podcast Awards. Your nomination can help us keep doing what we love, encouraging women to rise to their highest potential and celebrating the bonds of sisterhood. Registration for the People's Choice Podcast Awards begins July 1st, 2019 at www.podcastawards.com. Simply register, then submit your nomination for the She Compass Show. Thank you for your support. You can find Helen on the Life's Black Belts podcast. Life's Black Belts is a show that dives into the lives of everyday people and their real-life experiences. The show invites listeners to learn from their challenges, those of the guest, goals, failures, ability to overcome obstacles, and how they grind through life and carve their own path. The show host writes that, quote, "This is an extraordinary story that's a must-listen-to episode." Helen is an incredible human being that empowers women to find their happiness, confidence, and beauty. Please join Helen on episode 31 of the Life's Black Belts show and show your support. That's episode 31, and we'll have a link to this podcast episode in the show notes. We're excited to announce Helen's latest speaking engagement. Helen will join the ladies of Believe, Inspire, Grow in Chatham Township, New Jersey on Friday, August 9th, 2019 at 10 a.m. for an inspiring talk on how she overcame the challenges of severe dyslexia and dysgraphia, poverty, teenage pregnancy, and the loss of her hair as a child to become a successful business owner and author of the 3-time award-winning book, Finding Our She Compass, 15 Life Lessons for Women Voyaging Toward Restoration, Reconstruction, and Renewal. Helen has been empowering women through word and action for years and is the recipient of multiple awards for her dedication to improving the lives of women everywhere. Our podcast, The She Compass Show, is based on that book premise of using life lessons on the path to self-discovery. Please join us for a great day of conversation, fellowship, and encouragement. For more details on the event and to learn how to become a member of Believe, Inspire, Grow, also known as BIG, contact Kathy Maloney at cmaloney1@verizon.net. That's CMALONEY, the number 1, at verizon.net. You can also visit the website at believeinspiregrow.com. And we'll also have links to the contact information and website for Believe, Inspire, Grow in our show notes for this episode. We look forward to seeing you there. Now, back to the show. And taking a deep breath can completely change just 1 second of a deep breath can completely change your perspective.
Right. And that's why I always tell people, like, if you're angry about something, you have to know the difference between anger and someone complaining about something or you complaining about something that will make you angry. If your food comes cold, I understand. I just got an order the other day from one of the best people to get it wrong on the planet. And I won't say who that is, but it's a fast food place. And they're always getting something wrong. And I had no business eating it in the first place because I promised myself I would stop eating fast food. And maybe that was the universe's way of telling me that wasn't good for you anyway.
Yeah, it could be.
So I had my hamburger all ready to eat. And I asked them, please hold the sauce because I don't like a lot of sauce on my burgers. So I double checked the order and noticed on the top bun there was no sauce, but when I opened it, it was everywhere, and I could not eat it. So what I did, instead of complaining or getting angry about it, I just took a deep breath and I said, "This is going to be out of my control. I can't take it back. I'm like 5 miles away from the place. I'm not willing to go back and have someone try to do it right." I just took a deep breath and I thought of something else to eat. Now at that point, I could have started a whole complaint within myself, like, oh, they got it wrong. Oh, they always get it wrong. Oh my God, why did I do this? Blah, 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 and on and on and on. And what that does is it causes frustration for the rest of your day because you can easily be your own Debbie Downer in your complaints.
And the research will back you up on that what you were saying about legitimate complaints. I believe I read in one article that if you take a look at your text messages, take a look at your emails that you're sending to people, and even analyzing your conversations that you're having, if 20% is your mark, if more than 20% of that conversation is negative, you need to take a step back and determine whether or not you are potentially opening up your mental health to damage. Because it's just, as you say, there's so many things in this world that we can't control, so many things we could control, but think of the impact that it would have trying to do it. And it's where it's easier to just take a step back, take that deep breath that you talked about, and thinking about other ways to go about it. And I think that's also true when it comes to managing people who want to bring complaints to your space. There are two people in my head that I'm thinking about right now. One of them is from my past, and one of them is from my present. And in both situations, the situation is reversed. The person from my past is the one who used to call me on the phone. Helen, you know who I'm talking about. Used to call me on the phone pretty much 2-3 times a week, and the entire within seconds. I think the most I would get from her was, "Hey, how you doing?" And within seconds, the entire conversation was about her and what she wasn't able to do and how she felt. Now, it'd be one thing if she was calling me up and the conversation was about her and she was just giving me nothing but good news about life, about her life, about her family, and all the things that she would wanted to do. There are people that have done that with me, and I'm more than happy to celebrate right along with them. It gives me energy. It makes me feel positive. But if you're a person who's, constantly in someone's life and the only thing you can do is bring that negativity to them, then that becomes an issue. And that's where you want to take a step back and say, wait a second, maybe this is a person I need to handle in doses.
Well, you need a long handle spoon.
Right.
What happens with those kinds of people, and they are everywhere. There are people who will suck up your energy, and I call them vampires. You invite them in, and then they suck up all your energy and all your blood, and then they leave. But they keep coming back because you've invited them in once and you don't know how to shut the door on that. And a lot of people have that's toxic. And those type of people can cause you to have your own personal complaints. Because when you let people have too much of you and you don't have enough of you to give, there's only so much of each and every one of us to go around. We can only put ourselves in so many broken down sections until that box is going to explode. So we need to make sure that for our mental health and for our sanity, that we take people in increments. And if there are people in your life who you just have to decide sometime that they don't belong there. Because if the best they can do is offer you everything that's going on bad with them and you take it in, I've had circumstances like that all of my life, because I think as an entrepreneur and as a kind person, there is a lot of truth to people who take people's kindness for weakness. And we're not weak people just because we're kind. That doesn't mean that you have the opportunity to come in and set up a scenario that the only thing we can do is complain. And, we're taking our energy and we're putting it in a place where it is really unhealthy for us. Some of these relationships that people have with whatever it is, food, people, work, husbands, children, whatever those relationships will be, they have to be managed, and you are the only one who can do that. You have to really be careful about how you adjust your life and how many pieces you are going to compartmentalize yourself into.
And the other thing that I want to point out, and it goes along the lines, Helen, of what you were just saying, is the desire for people who are in misery to love company. So, and this is something that we have witnessed in you and I have worked both collectively and separately. And we have witnessed this in our lives as we move forward, that depending on where you are in your space and where you are in your level of success, there are people who may be comfortable with what you're doing and the achievements that you've received, and other people who pretend to be comfortable or appear to be comfortable, but in reality, they want to do what they can to sabotage your happiness.
Well, those are those vampires that are waiting to knock at your door and for you to invite them in. And as I said, once you do that, you set yourself up. But here's a trick that I would like to explain to everybody. Just because you invite someone in doesn't mean that you don't have the right to lock them out. And so if you are experiencing toxicity from anybody, you have the right to protect your mental health and your sanity, and your everyday life as you know it can be changed by people, because people really ultimately are genuinely good people. But every now and then you get someone who mixes up things, or they're looking for something from you that you can't give. And I'm not even talking about monetarily. I'm talking about mentally. People will suck your mental energy and leave you just dried. And when they leave you dry, you're trying to figure out how to, get a glass of water to fill yourself back up again, because they come in and they suck out all the fuel, but no one refills you. So you have to know that in terms of, and this thing about complaints can go into so many different things, because a complaint has to grow from somewhere. It starts like a little bitty, a tiny little fire, and then it turns into a big forest fire, because it's all about who you're surrounding yourself with and the things that you know about yourself mentally and how to take care of yourself, whether it's kids, whether it's brothers, sisters. I hear from all sorts of people, from all different walks of life, from all different nationalities, from women and men, that they're being driven insane. But I tell them there's an easy way out of your own complaint, because if your complaint has to do with mostly things that are around you, they're easily removable.
In fact, this article, the Psychology Today, has a couple of things that are going to back you up in terms of the types of complaining to look out for. And the reason this is interesting to me is based on what you just said, Helen, and what we were talking about a moment ago, which is where people can even maybe intentionally or unintentionally sabotage your happiness. So let me just read a little bit to give you some insight in terms of what Psychology Today refers to as the types of complaints to keep your ear out for. There is a growing body of research addressing complaining, what it is, and when, and why it happens. To begin with, complaining is simply expressing dissatisfaction. This usually happens verbally, as in the case of two people on a date commenting on the awful dinner they have been served. Complaining usually happens in the wake of a negative situation. Traffic was worse than expected, the movie was disappointing, the city council should never have approved that new development. It is useful to understand that complaining comes in different types. There are those who never seem to be satisfied. These are known as chronic complainers. They have a tendency to ruminate on problems and to focus on setbacks over progress. Some research suggests that making a habit of complaining can actually rewire the brain so that those particular thinking orientations become ingrained. It is possible to rewire this rewiring to make it more positive, of course, But chronic complainers probably don't think it would work all that well. And that goes right back to what you were saying a moment, Helen, about, being surrounded by toxicity and why it's really important to keep yourself aware of a level of complaints that people bring into your space, because it's one of those things, just like you said, a vampire is not something you see coming. They knock softly, they sort of creep into the room slowly. You don't see them coming. And complainers are the same way. They can slowly build and, as you say, suck the energy out of your space. And so it's really important to be paying attention to that and to not let that negativity reach a certain point.
Right. And especially if you're a chronic complainer. And I really know people like that, and they turn it into more than a complaint, because it takes someone else to take it even further when they're complaining constantly like that. And you're kind of looking at them like, gosh, why are you always so negative? I mean, you complain about this, you complain about that, and even when something's good, you complain about it. People fall into habit. But what you don't want to do is let that be the Debbie Downer in your room. And especially if you're an entrepreneur, or even if you're a person who's working for one company, you can think of somebody who's always not on board. Like they have to be the person who's not on board with anything, or something can always be better, or something can always be done different. That is so mentally challenging and frustrating. I can't tell you how much that can take away from a person's whole intellect.
And you do it with such grace. You don't probably remember this, and if once I bring it up, you will. But these are the things that I see you do in action, just because of who you are and the type of environment that is very important to you to keep. Now, you'll have a room full of women, and whether you're lecturing them, whether you're throwing a party, whether you're building camaraderie, whether or not these are women getting their hair done, whatever the case may be, you're very good at this. I've seen people come in who are, you sort of set the pace for a sense of connection between those women. And then there are some women who are threatened by other women. And so you can see that person come in and they sort of roll their eyes, they start making the snide comments. And I have seen you nip that in the bud. You'll say immediately, you'll either pull the person aside, or you'll have some comment that will negate their negativity so that you bring the energy back to the room. And I think that's really powerful. It speaks to, complaining, as you said earlier, I think this is what you were alluding to before. Complaining is a gateway to bullying, and it's a gateway to bringing down the energy of other people. It's a gateway to not allowing people to flourish, and you will not tolerate that. I've seen it in action, and you'll close the gate on it right away. As soon as you see any kind of negativity coming from somebody to potentially sabotage the positivity of others.
Yes, and especially when, like I said, when it's taking so much from your everyday individual personality in life, because complaining constant is just as bad as anything else that a person can do, especially if it just turns into a habit. Now, if that's your bad habit, you need to fix it, but I don't want to be a part of it, because I have enough daily complaints of my own that I know and feel as though they're legitimate, but I have to, like I said, take a deep breath and just stand back and say to myself, is it worth it? Is it worth letting this one thing ruin my whole day, or this complaint, even if it's legitimate? Because I don't think, most people as a whole, when they have a complaint, it's a legitimate complaint, because they're not chronic complainers. But you even have to take the legitimate complaints that you have and try to put them in a place where you can put them to rest, because you have to figure out the worth in that. Sometimes it can ruin your whole day.
And I'm amazed at some of the folks that have some, to quote you, very legitimate complaints. Like I think about people who don't have a home to sleep in, or stories of men and women who have been wrongly convicted,
right.
Who come out of these devastating situations, and the first thing that people ask them is, do you blame someone? Are you angry? And the first thing that most of them will say is, I moved on from this a long time ago. I forgave this situation a long time ago, because they recognize that holding on to that negativity was only impacting them. They could not hurt anybody else with any negativity that they would have held on to. It only was hurting them. And those are people that really understand the process of knowing that, if you continue to complain your way through whatever your situation is, and the complaint is not legitimate, that's when you start working against yourself and working against your situation.
Yes, of course. And knowing the difference from a complaint and someone who's just, it's the same thing.
Right.
Actually, after a while, it's the same thing. So, complaints turn into toxicity. Toxicity turns into someone who you just can't be around because they're complaining all the time.
And you asked a good question a second ago, and I want to underscore what you said, which is to say that if you're the person that you're sitting back now, a person who's a chronic complainer is not the person who's going to typically be looking in the mirror and saying, "Oh, I'm the one that's doing it." So you may not necessarily know if that's a problem that you have, but Helen was alluding to this. I think she's alluded to this in previous podcasts and certainly a moment ago, where she said, look around. If you're starting to see your circle dwindle, or you're starting to see that people want to spend less and less time with you, or you're beginning to wonder why you don't have the connections that you think you should have, that's always, to me, a really good sign to look inward. Because even if I have the best intentions, I have to wonder what kind of impact I'm having on other people. And maybe, depending on the relationships that you have with some folks, maybe not everybody, but you may have someone close enough in your space that you could sit down and say, hey, I'm having this issue. I'm noticing that I'm starting to lose some of the connections that I thought I had, or the connections that I thought I had weren't as strong as I believe them to be. Give me an honest assessment of what you think the issues are. And this is a program that seeks to empower women. So if someone, were to come to me, I would be as honest and as kind in my response as I could, because this is about bettering yourself. And as we can see, it's not just about building better relationships around you. It's really about rewiring your brain so that you don't affect your mental health, and you have the ability to extend your health to as great as it can be. So that, to me, is a plus. Helen, what you were saying there is to make sure that if you are the person, or wondering if you're the person who's to the Debbie Downer in the room, do some work and take a look at your outside surroundings and really do some self-analysis.
Well, that's true. And I think that what typically happens is that person at one point needs to be pulled to the side, because once you do something in repetition for so long, you don't even see yourself anymore.
Exactly.
So basically, when everyone's telling you the same thing, there's something you need to look into in yourself. You can't just keep denying that everybody is wrong, because there's something there.
I agree.
Yep.
And I want to, now this is what I want to do now that we've kind of talked a little bit about shared our personal experiences and talked about, what the effect is that it can have. I do want to, before we close out here, I do want to give you some solutions for how to complain well. Because as we said at the outset, what we don't want to do is get to a situation where you never talk about anything. You never talk about it with the people that you care about. You lock away all of your energies, and you carry whatever concerns that you have. You don't want to bother other people with it. You don't want to talk about it. You don't want to, as I've heard myself say, I don't want to hear my own voice complain about it. So you tend to, and particularly in this world day and age where women are strong and we're making all of our own choices and doing everything for ourselves, we run the risk of having the opposite effect on our health by not talking about it. So that's not what this conversation is about. This conversation is about talking about it in a healthful way that is best for you. So let me give you some feedback also from Psychology Today about the benefits of complaining well. The instrumental complaint is all about solving problems. When you confront your romantic partner about overspending on the credit card, now that could be instrumental complaining, especially if you focus on the impact of the problem, the importance of change, and cooperate to create a plan for change. One study suggests that these types of complaints make up fewer than 25% of all complaints. In one study, researchers found that happy people complain less. They also looked at the evidence that happy folks in their study were more mindful. They hypothesized then that more cheerful folks are likely to complain more mindfully, more strategically, if you will, and with a specific goal in mind. So when we view it this way, a rough guide for complaining emerges. Number 1, Avoid dampening your mood by complaining only rarely. Number 2, complain only in instances where you believe it will affect real and positive change. Number 3, consider whether affirmation or some other strategy will work instead of complaining. And number 4, limit your exposure to complaining by limiting your exposure to complainers. So these are all things that we just talked about, particularly I like the one where they say, consider whether an affirmation or some other strategy will work. Helen, you hit that right on the head with taking a deep breath and taking a small form of meditation. And we also talked about the fact that you limit your exposure to complaining by limiting your exposure to complainers. So not allowing the Debbie Downers to rule your space and really taking control of making sure that you keep your space in a positive place. So I want to thank all of my ladies and all of my gentlemen and all of my young people, my old people, people of every color, creed, race, sexual orientation across the world and across the globe who have joined us today. We love having you. We are so appreciative that you join us on this show every week. And before we go, I have a couple of little housekeeping things that I want to remind you of. The first thing I want to remind you of is that the She Compass Show is participating in the 14th Annual Podcast Awards. If you heard the ads here mid-roll during the conversation, you heard a little bit about that, but I just want to shout that out once more and let you know that we could sure use your support. If you go to www.podcastawards.com and select the She Compass Show, if you go to scroll down to T, register and select the She Compass Show to vote for us in the society category and also for the People's Choice Award. We would very much appreciate it. If you love what we're doing, your vote allows us to keep doing what we're doing, and that is to empower women to be their best and rise to their greatest potential. The other thing I want to tell you is that we will not have a show on August 13th. And the reason is, again, if you heard the ads, Helen will be speaking to a group of women and empowering them to live their best life that weekend. So we will be unavailable to produce a show for you for that week, but we will be back the following week with another show. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. If you have questions or comments or want to give us any feedback, you know where to find us. We're on social media on Instagram at shecompass.com, on Twitter at shecompass, and also on Facebook at shecompass. So we look forward to your feedback, and as always, we thank you so much for joining us, and please join us again for our next episode. Have a wonderful day.